This happened last year in early April. I work in construction, and my days start early. I had to be on site at 6:30 in the morning, which meant I had to leave my house at 5:30. It was still dark outside when I got into my car and started driving to the site. The roads were deserted, as you would expect for that time of day. I drove past closed stores, empty parking lots, and dark houses. The city was still asleep, and I was one of the few people who was up and about. As I was driving, I remembered that there was a Starbucks on my way to work. I had been there before, and I knew that it was supposed to be open at 5:30 in the morning. I looked at the clock on my dashboard, and it was a few minutes before 6. I thought I could use another cup of coffee to wake me up, so I decided to stop. When I got there, I saw that the lights were off, and there was a single car in the parking lot. I thought that maybe they had changed their opening hours, or maybe they were closed for some reason, but on a whim, I decided to try anyway. I parked my car and got out. I walked up to the building, and when I did, I noticed that it looked just as closed as you would expect. It was dark and empty. I pressed my face against the glass to make sure. Then I noticed the opening hours posted on the door. Sure enough, it was supposed to be open, so I tried the door. I pushed the handle, and to my surprise, it opened. I stepped inside the cafe, but there was no sign of life. The only light came from the street lamps outside. I called out a few times to see if anybody was there, but there was no answer. The place was closed, but why was the door unlocked? I felt a bit uneasy, but I shrugged it off and started to walk towards the door to leave. That's when I heard a noise. It was a faint rustling sound, like somebody was moving around in the back of the store. I turned around but saw nothing. I called out again, but again, there was no response. I started to feel nervous, and I began to wonder if there was someone in the store with me. It felt weird, so I decided to leave. I headed for the door and went back to my car. As soon as I stepped outside, I took a deep breath of fresh air. I felt relieved to be out of that store, but also confused. I thought about calling the police to report what I had seen, but I had decided against it. I didn't want to get involved in a police investigation. I told myself it was nothing, and then I went to work. The rest of the day was a blur. We worked hard on the construction site, and I tried to put the Starbucks incident out of my mind. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my coworkers. I wanted to forget about it and focus on my job. When the workday was finally over, I drove back home, still feeling a bit uneasy from what happened earlier. As I was driving past the Starbucks, I saw that there were police cars everywhere. The parking lot was sealed off with yellow tape, and officers were standing guard outside the store. I thought about stopping, but I just kept driving. I didn't want to interfere with the investigation. When I got home, I called the police to report what happened that morning. They thanked me for the information, but said they did not need me to come in for an interview or anything like that. I never found out exactly what happened until the details became public in the news. I found out that the place had been robbed. The 2 workers were held hostage, and one of their cars was stolen. To this day, I have no idea if they were there when I was in the store, or if they were already gone by then. I can't help but wonder if that noise I heard was somebody pleading for help, or maybe it was my imagination. I'm genuinely not sure. This happened around 10 years ago, but I still tell the story often. I actually quit my job at Starbucks because of what happened. I just decided it wasn't worth the minimum wage I was getting paid. It wasn't all bad though. Every morning the aroma of freshly brewed coffee permeated the air. I never got sick of the smell. I don't think too many people in the food service industry can say that. It was a busy place, with many customers from early in the morning all the way until late at night. I was constantly surprised by how many people drank coffee at night. I had been working there for 3 years at the time. My colleagues and I were a tight-knit group, and we worked well together. One busy Saturday morning, a woman came in and ordered a venti latte. She was about 40 years old and seemed to be in a hurry. She looked angry, but I didn't judge at first. I greeted her with a smile and got to work making her drink. I added the espresso, steamed milk, and topped it off with a dollop of whipped cream. I handed her the cup, and she took a sip.
"This isn't right,"
she said, handing the cup back to me.
"It's too sweet."
"I'm sorry about that," I replied, taking back the cup. "Let me make you a new one." I remade the latte, this time cutting back on the sugar. I handed it to her, and she took a sip.
"It's still not right,"
she said, her voice becoming more irritated. I was starting to get frustrated. I'd made the latte exactly how I was supposed to, and I couldn't understand what was wrong. But I remained calm and professional, and offered to make it again. The third time, I was determined to get it right. I made it with just a hint of sugar, and handed it to her.
"This is ridiculous,"
she exclaimed.
"I can't believe you can't make a simple latte correctly."
I could feel my patience wearing thin, and I muttered something sarcastic under my breath as she walked away. But that was a mistake. The woman heard what I said and turned around. She walked back over to me in a rage. I was expecting her to yell at me or ask for the manager or something, but she didn't. She wound up and threw the latte right at me. I ducked and got out of the way for most of it, but it missed me by inches, splattering all over the counter behind me. I was shocked and angry. I stood up and looked at the woman. She was breathing heavily, seething with anger. I didn't bother saying a word to her. She was still on the other side of the counter, so I wasn't really scared. I immediately called the police. The customer was arrested and charged with assault. There were many witnesses who were willing to vouch for me. Like I said earlier, I decided to quit after this incident. This wasn't the only horrible customer I've dealt with. I could tell you other stories, but this one is by far the worst. I could have been seriously burned and injured by that woman. It just wasn't worth it to work there anymore. It was a typical Friday night, and I was working. I had gotten a job at the Starbucks across the street from the mall. I was closing up the shop with my coworker June. I was 19 years old at the time, and I was about a year out of high school. June was a year younger than me. This location closed at 11 p.m., which is late for a Starbucks. We had just finished cleaning the store, wiping down the counters and sweeping the floors. I was ready to head home and get some rest after a long week of work. But before we could leave, I decided to go to the bathroom. I had a 45-minute bus ride ahead of me, so I couldn't wait. I excused myself to use the bathroom while June gathered her things. I headed to the back of the store, past the rows of tables and chairs, and pushed open the door to the restroom. The light flickered on overhead. I squinted from the powerful fluorescent lights. I walked up to the urinal closest to the stalls. I unzipped my pants and did what you do at a urinal. No need for more details. As I stood there, I thought I heard a strange noise coming from one of the stalls. It sounded like a muffled groan or grunt. I had already checked the bathrooms, so I didn't know what the sound could be. I was too cautious not to check, though. I walked over to the stall and pushed open the door. There was a man standing on the toilet, glaring at me with an angry expression on his face. His eyes were wild and bloodshot, and his clothes were rumpled and stained. I stood there in shock for a few seconds. I was a deer in the headlights. After I came to my senses, I realized that the man was clutching a knife in his right hand. He didn't lunge at me or anything, but he looked like he was ready to. The man was breathing heavily and staring a hole through my chest. It's a good thing that I had just peed, because it would have been a real mess otherwise. I burst out of the bathroom and slammed the door behind me. I told June what I had seen, and we ran out of that place down the street. We didn't even bother to lock the door. When the officers arrived, we told them where the man was. One of the cops asked if the place was locked, and I honestly couldn't remember at the time if we had locked it or not, so I went with them. That's when I found out that I had left it unlocked. They cautiously entered the place, guns drawn. They found the man and took him out in handcuffs. I was relieved when I saw that. My worst fear was that I would hear a gunshot. Nobody wants to hear that. It was a really creepy thing to see that man staring at me as he was walking out with the cops. I couldn't understand what he would have wanted to do in that place. We didn't leave any money there overnight, and there wasn't really anything to steal. I guess he was just crazy. It may be impossible to make any sense of it. I used to work in one of those rest stops that you see on the side of the highway sometimes. I was a barista at the Starbucks there. This particular place was just a counter with common seating for the other places in the area. It was really more like a shopping mall food court than anything else. It was right next to the public washroom though. That's where my coworkers and I went to the bathroom as well. It was just another day on the job when I was scheduled for the morning shift. The line was packed, and I was frantically trying to keep up with the orders that were pouring in. It was just me and one of my coworkers there. There was a lot of work for just the two of us, but it was a small store, and there was really only room for 3 of us at the most. I was serving a customer when I saw a creepy-looking man walk past. He was a tall, sketchy-looking guy, dressed in ragged clothing with greasy hair. He walked straight past the line and headed for the bathroom. I didn't think much of it at first, but after a few seconds, I heard a scream coming from the bathroom. It was someone wailing for help, but it quickly stopped. Then I noticed 2 or 3 people running out of the washroom. I realized that something was seriously wrong. I looked around, but my coworker was already swamped with orders. I knew I had to check it out. I left the long line of customers and made my way towards the bathroom. As I approached the door, I could hear muffled voices and shuffling noises coming from inside. I stopped for a moment, then I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside, I saw 2 men. One of them was holding a gun, pointing it at the other. The victim was trembling and looked like he was about to pass out. The attacker glared at me with a crazed look in his eyes. I quickly closed the door and ran back to the counter. My hands were shaking as I called for security and explained what was happening. Thankfully, there was a security department in that place, and there was also a police officer assigned to the rest stop. Because of that, help was there in what seemed like less than a minute. I pointed out the attacker, and the officer quickly apprehended him. The victim was taken to the hospital, but he had no serious injuries. It turned out that it was just a random act of violence against a stranger. The attacker was simply trying to rob him. I have no idea why he picked that guy. Maybe it looked like he had money, or maybe he seemed like the kind of guy who wouldn't fight back. I'm not sure, but it was definitely a bad day for that guy. I can only imagine. After that incident, I finished my shift and went home. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. It was a close call, but I was glad that I was able to help. When I returned to work, it was like nothing even happened. The place was a constant revolving door of customers, and none of them had any idea of what we experienced that day. I quit a few months later because I found a new job closer to my apartment. I currently work in a pretty rough part of town, and it's only been 6 months, but nothing close to that has happened yet.